This is a very special edition, our 30th anniversary edition of this roundtable, and it's going to be, I'm sure, the best ever. So without further ado, I'm going to invite my co-chairs, Joan Hoey and Alistair Ross, to come and join me for a brief opening discussion before we hear from the President. So this year's conference goes under the rubric Progress in an Age of Upheaval. There's certainly an age of upheaval. We're all seeing that. Let's hope there's progress too. We're going to examine that. We have an extraordinary upheaval in geopolitics. We also have an extraordinary upheaval in the area of technology. And Alistair, perhaps you could just kick us off with a few thoughts on the artificial intelligence revolution, which I'm reliably told is going to change absolutely everything.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because that sounds like hype. You know, you tell people the world is going to be different from now on, and people assume you're sort of hyping everything up. But I think in many ways, this is one of those technologies that's quietly come along and already changed an immense amount. But I think it's barely scratched the surface of the potential AI has to change our world. I think there are two ways of looking at it. One is through the technology lens. This is a technology innovation. It's computers doing what computers do. But the interesting thing there is the pace of change has been extraordinary, like nothing else in the digital transformation that's been going on for 50, 60, 70 years. So that pace makes it very hard to predict where we're going to end up. I think the key thing to watch for me, if there was one thing to watch, it would be this concept of RSI, recursive self-improvement, which is where models begin to observe themselves and begin to make changes to their own code based on their observations of how they could improve. We're not there yet, and there's disagreement about how far away we are. But AI has proved itself to be a lot faster in every case than people assume. So that could be just around the corner. When that happens, you get this explosion in capability. So
and you have the impression that even the people who are in charge of some of the leading models are almost in awe of the pace at which things are getting.
Absolutely. I think this is one of the sort of striking things, that the inventors, the developers, the sort of maths geniuses who are putting all this stuff together are being overtaken and outpaced. And they're looking into the black boxes they've created and trying to figure out what's going on in there, which is sort of quite new. I mean, that's not something that we've experienced.
And the challenge is to make sure that it amounts to progress and not some horrible disaster, which is
in short, yes.
Very good. Yeah. So at the same time as this revolution is going on, we have another revolution in geopolitics. We have an old world order, which is, depending on what your medical metaphor is, it's either dead or in a serious advanced stage of decay, and we're not entirely sure what's going to replace it. This event is happening at a time of a critical NATO summit. We're going to be hearing news from that as we speak. And Joan, one of the tasks that you have is to try to collate all this into some sort of forecast of what's going to happen in Europe and in Greece. And I think it's always useful to start off with a sort of an encapsulated view of your forecast for what lies ahead, at least in the short term.
Thank you, Daniel. Good morning, everyone. Great to have you with us. Well, the effects of the Iran war continue to dominate the outlook for the global economy this year in 2026, and maybe a little next year too. But the balance of risk has obviously shifted in a more positive direction since the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding in June. Of course, Europe is one of the regions that has been most exposed to the energy price shock that has been caused by the war because of its heavy dependence on imported oil and gas. Now, the ceasefire, the signing of the memorandum means that energy prices have already come down from their recent highs, and that poses downside risk for inflation. So inflation maybe will be less than many had forecast even a month ago. And there's upside risks to growth, maybe slightly more positive growth outcomes, but we still expect a rather weak performance in terms of regional growth in Europe in 2026 because the effects of the war will take time to unwind. So the Economist Intelligence Unit forecast for Europe as a whole is for growth of 1.2% and 0.8% in the Eurozone, and then picking up respectively to 1.7% and 1.4% in 2027. Now, the southern European economies have been performing much better in recent years than the Eurozone average, and the Greek economy in particular has been growing much faster in recent years. And what we've seen is, really stellar management of the public finances and the public debt. It's been exemplary. Foreign investor confidence in the country has really returned. We've seen growth, real GDP growth, averaging around 2% in recent years, and indeed in the first quarter of 2026, Greek real GDP grew by 2%, driven mainly by fixed investment growth of 12.1%. Now, of course, the war, the fallout from the war has an effect here too, and particularly in terms of private consumption. Household consumption has been slightly depressed, but nevertheless, this memorandum and the recent developments in the war mean that I think our above forecast growth forecast for Greece of 2% will be borne out. I just wanted to mention one thing, that we've just done an exercise at the Economist Intelligence Unit looking over the past 10 years at performance in our risk indices. The EIU has two measures of country risk. One is focused on operational challenges that businesses face, so operational risk. And the other is more looking at the banking sector and also sovereign creditworthiness, sovereign risk or financial risk. Now, we did this exercise for the whole region, and there is one standout front runner in terms of improvement in performance, and that is Greece over the past 10 years. So since 2016, the country has achieved the most significant fall in risk, in both operational and financial risk. And that marks, obviously, a very significant turnaround from the depths of the Eurozone sovereign debt crisis, when Greek public debt as a percentage of GDP was around 180%. It actually went up to about 200% during the pandemic because of the sharp fall in GDP. And it's now down to getting to around 140%, is going to fall by the end of the decade to around 115% of GDP. So pretty spectacular turnaround, and particularly in comparison with other countries in the Eurozone, where the debt GDP ratios are going in the opposite direction. So I just wanted to mention that. As a piece of good news for Greece.
It's always nice to hear about things going well in Greece, of course. I'm just reminded that over these 30-year periods, we've lived through a lot of discussions at this, would Greece join the euro? Then we had the euro and the Greek economic crisis, and then all the recoveries programs, and here we are with this good news that you said. I guess looking ahead, we're bound to have further ups and downs. What could possibly go wrong, Joan?
In Greece, or?
In Greece, yes. I mean, you've painted a very rosy picture, but I think one should be aware of what the potential risk could be for a country like Greece in a potentially quite a volatile part of the world.
Yeah, of course, you talked about the geopolitical turbulence, Daniel, and Greece is at this crossroads, exposed to risk in the Middle East, to the East as well. So geopolitics is affecting how governments are pursuing diplomacy and policy making, and obviously this makes life for businesses much more difficult. I wouldn't want to underestimate the challenges either that still remain for Greece, and we're going to be looking at those in our discussions today and in subsequent days, because there are still, very big economic challenges. And in the first instance, there's still a kind of affordability, cost of living issue here. There's an election next year. Our forecast is for that New Democracy will win a third consecutive term, which I guess, you know, is good news in terms of on the policy front. So in terms of risk, I would really emphasize the geopolitical ones, you know, the external shocks. But Greece has proved itself to be quite resilient in the face of shocks from the fallout from the Ukraine war, from the pandemic, first of all, when New Democracy first came to power, and now the Middle East. It's been pretty resilient. So yeah, don't want to over-egg everything, but it's certainly looking more positive than it was back in 1996 or back in 2000.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. I think that gives us plenty of background to take us into the conversations over the next 3 days. We're going to be looking at all the opportunities and risks from many different angles. But thank you very much, Joan, and we'll be back, obviously, shortly. And now it's my pleasure to invite the President of the Hellenic Republic to please come and give his presentation.